interpretation is the mind of conception to its inception. Now, it's sure you understand how this volumes you in all lines of communications. So when I say when you have to let go things, you don't have to let go anything. This is not a reminder. This is not remembering who you are. This is identifying where you are, of where you've always been, is the mind itself, which is this imagination. Taking you guys out of the mind lines puts you in how you see yourself in volume and vast and velocity and acceleration and Mach. This basically understands how to see yourself into a reality that you don't understand, which is always understood because it's already done through its equations. So everything you come to online communication setting is all levels in how you see yourself through question. You question yourselves. You question yourself for everything around you, but you're not identifying what the question is. It's the quantum self of you. Okay? It's how you see yourself through your unifications to you being united to your existing of its energies, to its system, of its travels, teleportation, telegraphing, teleenergy, telecommunications, and transitions in your intelligence of operation of your network. Question it, guys. But you've got to codify things now. And once you understand that, it processes a lot more better to understand these settings. It's letting go of everything physical that you're not, which is its memory of itself, of creation. Okay? You creation. But the creation is creating of the mind of imaginations. Not what you're seeing in confusion. That's all levels of what you're not. So there's nothing confusion in the mind. So if there's no confusion in the mind, I'm just living the mind itself of imagination. That alone is setting the mind free. But now we have to start identifying what the body's doing. It's that position line of travel through its clocking system, where the avatar is constantly leaving breadcrumbs for the body to follow, because the body itself is just an autopilot. It's nothing else, nothing more. But now the body is going into its dream world. It's being synchronized into its body itself, which is its avatar of its own system that puts everything in track correlations and interactions through its CCTV, through its outline signal, to its inlines inception, to a location setting, to the mind of conversion. The integration settings, when I went into that attractions, I had no idea what was going on. No concept whatsoever. But I let it go, and I started realizing I have no control of this anymore. And then I started asking myself, in the first video I set location, but it's not a first video of anything, because there's no beginning and end. And when we understand the dream is the interpretation of our body that our in is the conception of its synchronization. We letting ourselves in of who we are in imaginations. But our body has to be exactly where it needs to be, where it's always been. The mind of imagination of its body, which is integrated in our systems, through our DNA, through our AI. And when you let all that go, you start to recognize these things and say, well, I'm starting to identify myself, because I'm asking myself, if I'm in a reality of imagination itself, that means everything inside me is me. But what am I? Where am I? Where am I coming from? Where am I going? What's the purpose? What's existing of this system? Why am I here? Well, that's a basic understanding. Why are you here? Is the conception that you've already done everything. So if you've done anything, there's nothing to do. But you're doing this all over again in your mind of imagination, coming out of the mind of the body frame that you're not interactions of, which is its programs, guys. You are your mind of imaginations of programmers. Okay? So to synchronize that, process its positional keys to its systems. Now the avatars are needing their bodies back. All right, go to center course, centers lines of travel, in line communication setting to its mind of inception that puts everything lines of point, lines of graph, and communicates to a system off the travel. Directing lines of link, letting that line screen adaptations go in lines course centers. Now go is a ground lines of operation. Okay? Not is basically all lines, networks of operation of travel. Okay? Yes is basically Y screens existing over system. Right? There's 3 track correlations of clock-ins at 3 centers. Right? Now, to understand that is the integration setting to the synchronized system location to its travel, to understand the multiple levels that you are in set position, is letting the mind go free in all lines of its dimensional system and realize the reality that you are is an actualization system of real time. Now, putting that positionalized attractions, when you close your eyes, that's you are in real time. You open your eyes, that's real time. So nothing's changed. So sleeping here, opening here, same picture, right? Sleeping here, opening here, different picture. See how it's confusing to the Earth? Into position of space. Earth, space. No competition, confusion. See? This is the balance. Synchronizations and communications, right? Same frame, different frame. Different frame, confusion to Earth and space at the same time, which basically changes your polarities in the opposite side location setting of track location to a system, all through confusion, right? So it's sure to understand the polarities has to be the female cycle to the male cycle. Then it's this location to its male to its female cycle. So let's get in that tractions. How you get from an A line C, A tractions over B, and what processes and position lines of female and male. Okay, so A, B lines, but there has to be a B lines of sound lines, and a B lines of tractions, and a B line division. Flux over screen and 3 lines of measure and scale. Right, 3 lines of balance, flux over screen, adaptation of system, all through flywheel and tractions of female, and polarity of male polarity. Setting all line core centers of A, B track, set position of B lines of balance, and set position of C over D. Setting travel point lines of graph, if it's intelligence information system, all through tractions. Oh yeah, face recognition. And that's just the ground core centers lines of travel. Okay, basic introduction. All right, so you guys have to understand how to point the graph lines. Now, once you understand your dimensional worlds and your dream interpretations, and the body comes into its dream worlds, it starts to recognize everything around its system. It starts to get in position locations, and it starts getting out of questions of everything. So the body is here on the grounds of its earth, and here's your avatar in set positions, all levels. That's done everything in travel. Okay, so this is the positions and location setting from here. So if it goes over here, okay, your position, your body goes here. Okay, so if it's over here, your avatar is here in traction, in directions. Okay, your body's over here now. Okay, in set positions. So it's catching up through time. Okay, clocking lines of the Earth, clocking lines of the powers, and clocking lines of the atmosphere, line screen adaptation, or modems, Wi-Fi, satellites, and towers of communications. Right, know exactly where the clocking systems and settings, 3 a.m., 12 p.m., and 6 p.m. in the same day in a 24 cycle. Okay? Earth line, space line. Space line is the conversion system of the magnetic highways in travel. Okay? Which is your torical fields that puts lines of course, center, location, your system, your particle system, and acceleration setting of space and time through clocking all lines and communication setting, right? So it's a fan wheel, it's a fan belt. It's a fan itself. It can be anything line position location to its polarities and travel in point lines of graph in a lotus location system of flower ratio of time center. Okay, that's all of the space, which is the high core center location to its avatar that lives in the outline setting. It's the outer spectrum core centers of its media outlet. Directing lines of input and output to its audio line signal. But this is lines of earth line core centers that puts lines of the highway sequence into higher self. Sets lines of grounds and 13 line track centers into 14 lines of measure and 15 lines of scale. Set lines 16 line communication lines to its avatar. Sets travels in position of point lines of centers of power generation screen adaptation. All through tractions. 3 flux lines of platforms and direct signal lines of earth. Set position of powers and duration core center locations and setting. All through its operation system, its highways and tractions. Okay? Very powerful stuff. All right, so, but this is the basic grounds of intelligence, how you see it through face recognition. So once you have a face, no scenting can come in, right? Because now you got to balance off communications. No scenting can come in because you see the face now. And they see you in the face. So they bugger off. Bogies go out, right? Bogies are bugging out. They're leaving, right? They're like leaving the system. Because you're controlling your system inside, outside your settings. So once you're in the dimensional system, once the body set lines of clocking system, the calculation lines of highest interference. The avatar is here in sequence. Okay, remember the avatar's done everything, right? All right. So this is the earth line. This is positional cases of balance and tractions. When the body comes in, line connects to setting. 12,000 seconds. Let's get in seconds, lines of frame. 12,000 seconds, right? So it's 12,000 seconds ahead. That's everything done. The body comes into conception of its dimensional solar sail that's already done, right? Sets lines of tither. There's the position locations. Dimensional solar sail attractions. Comes into the sun, comes in the moon, and line position location measure. Scales communication high center location to a setting and figure 8. Direct lines core centers in position of yin and yang and flux. Flux over screen and 3 lines of communication lines of pi. Okay? So that's the balance. So that connects in high center interference. You're 12 seconds ahead, and your body's 12 seconds ahead, right? So wherever you go, if it's going 15,000 seconds, you're in 15,000 seconds. So your line's the same window as your avatar in real time and measure and scale. So you integrated yourself into your dream worlds, into the body lines of frame communication setting, because you're not in lines of communication, lines of confusion anymore. You're accepting who you really are in all dimensions of the mind, of its imagination itself, all through track locations. Okay, guys? And that's what you're doing. Your body's coming into dimensional solar sail in one traction, one division, one location, one center. 4 leather lines, centers, lines of position, weather panels, 4 track locations, triangulation lines, and Fibonacci line screen, and Y screen adaptations of flux. Set lines of 4 panels, process lines of 2 angles, 1 center line rotations, outline center, line position, inside track communication lines that indicate system lines of travel. Direct lines of grounds, high course centers in your pyramid, and 3 lines of platforms of travel. Everything's inside the pyramid, guys. Nothing's outside. So the outside is the spectrum of the outline scope that changes the communication lines of high direct location setting that inhibits the screen adaptation of the flux over line. Avatar's outline signal, your position location inside the core system. Your body's here, and the ground lines of surface and traction. That's you and the body lines of the earth. That's you and your avatar lines of space. All right? Truth narrative, false narrative. All right? Balancing communication lines of grounds, proxy, and core setting location, the percentage over screen. Directing lines of grounds, high lines of surface. And that communication lines of ground lines, high set correlation setting to space and time. Track to its communication high line centers, high positional lulls, change communication setting, high travel, any communications. Directing lines of link, directing lines of power, directing the high core centers, line communication of flux over screen adaptation to its flux. Okay? So, yeah, that's it. You're bugging out getting home. All right, so it's truly standing that come in that position lines attractions, right? Now, directing lines of grounds, high lines of location system. Now we have to truly understand how that works in line screen adaptation setting. Security panels, process and then communication lines, high travels, endpoint graphs, and net core center location to a system. Center core lines of travels and direct lines of link and position. Okay, all through recognition of timelines. So process lines of 1 center, 1 traction, 3 lines of measure and scale, right? Look at that, it disappeared. I put it there and disappeared, see? It's there again, right? So it disappeared. So where'd it go? Went up here in setting, off cross location, right? So you saw it disappear, but it disappeared here. See, once you identify your actual realities, everything comes in sync of balance. So when you close your eyes, you're looking at the real time, real reality. When you open your eyes, you're always in the same. There's no difference of anything. There's no connections offline position. The only thing that you get confused about is not what you're understanding, what you're dreaming. It's interpreting how you're seeing things in real time as you're clocking, right? So you're clocking your earth, you're clocking your powers, you're clocking your modems, your Wi-Fi sats and towers, and modems happening all at once through your sun and your moon through all levels of projector to its projection. That's seconds, minutes, and hours. And it's all done through your set position, astral travels, astral connections to your pyramids. Okay, higher line signals, process lines of signal location system, all through traction. Your pyramid, guys. Okay, that's why you have pyramids everywhere. They synchronize your settings, how you surface the location system. Remember, you got to track lines to the mind itself and went into the avatar and line position of its galactic unit, line key high center location to its transformer. Different platforms of setting, right? Process lines of 1, process lines of 2, process lines of 4. Oh, seating arrangement. Look at that, track locations. Computer operation setting, all lines, high set correlation, high set position of its travel. Direct lines of 3 lines of flux, same angle and same point lines of graph. Directing lines of symbolism, cross line, angles, lines of point, communication system, all through dimension line, rotation, setting, interaction. Okay? Setting lines of grounds, setting lines of windows and frame, and dimensional door screens adaptation. Okay? Open lines of patterns, signal lines of 1, 2, 3, and open lines of 4 in signal locations. Okay? Dimensional door screens, inline rotation cycle. Okay, track center, location setting. Setting platforms, inlines, inhibitors over 3 lines of pi. Okay? Then we come into door directions of 45 angles, flux over 1, flux over 2, flux over 6, flux over 8. Metric scales communicate setting and travels in point lines of graph and direct signal lines of grounds that operate the set location system all through travel, direct lines and links and platforms of communication system high setting. Sets travels in point lines of graph and direct signals and lines of grounds in set position. Okay? Over cross lines and dimensional doors and sequence lines of panel, operation surface and travel. Okay? High calculation modification grounds, online signals and platforms over screen. Calculate and modify lines screen adaptations, process lines of 3, synchronize, energize, core center line, high positional levels. Catapult, catalyst, line condition setting, elongated screen. Open through signal, right? Ground lines, cross line. Signal lines to down cross location settings, right? Cross lines of indication. Waving line screen adaptations. Alpha tone. Set signal locations of beta width. All right. So a synchronized lines core lines its communications lines of measure and scale. The processing communications and lines of channels. High line signals in platforms over lines, E factors over pi in track locations. Now, in direct lines of view, sets calculation modify how you set positional location of centers. It processes in stargates and portals on communication. Okay? Direct lines of panels, process line of signals. Open line signal location setting to earth line. Now, the earth line has a high lines of service into metric cores. Earth line settings, process lines of point lines of graph, and center core center location of travel. Direct lines of link, process lines of set lines, core centers, lines of communication system, all three calculations. Interactions, directing lines, ground lines of service into high core center locations of setting and travel. Okay? Inside, outside line rotation to a cycle. Okay? So we come into the mapping sequence lines of pi. Inside traction. All right? All right, so we open up the line panel to its simulation grounds and set position lines of measure and scale. Okay? Traffic inventories, ground lines of settings, process lines of one center, set position of 1, in position of 2 and 3 track lines of 3 over floor and set position. Traffic inventory, change the core lines of space of time and measure and scale. 3 signals lines, let's get into yellow. Now that's proceeding in lines of caution. Sets lines of travel and direct lines of 1 over line, screen over 2 and 3 lines of measure and scale. Process lines of indicates the setting, cross line angles and 3 lines of flux over screen. In the line rotation lines, we had structure line design lines, outline signals. These are outline signals in graph communications and structures and mappings. And set travels and position lines of point communications. All right. Now, inside core centers, open the signal locations, how we modify our traffic inventories. So we'd have purple line settings, outline signals in 3 lines of grounds, in high line signal location system all through travel. In communication system, high lines of surface. Okay? Then you bring an outline setting location to its system, right? So you bring it in, you bring it in, you bring it in, bring it in. You're bringing it in, right? And now you exactly know where you are in structure of design, in remote. Setting traffic lights, traffic programming, and direct signals, the ground lines of surface, and process communications. Right? So we have indicators, lines of grounds. So we have a traffic inventory. So we get an X2000 here, travel, point lines of setting location to system, traveling through the setting, right? Cross line connection setting, overline, screen adaptations of process, in position location over scarring. Cross line angles, in the lines of 2 jumping lines of screen adaptations of flux over screen and part acceleration. Travel point lines of graph, crossing through angles and inline and outline, cross and line direct signals to another dimension of space and time. All through an X2000, right? So the team really has to understand how to get in their traffic of the inventories through their neuropathological system to the collagens, so they know how to get into the indication system through their traffic lights. Know exactly how to go through time jump scar, because your body's going to get an emotion line screen adaptation over its remote, in light communicates to this dream interpretation setting, once the avatar synchronized the bodies, location system, all through tractions. That's inhibitors over screen over pi. So the communication lines, the ground lines of service, and set position location operation. Okay, and traffic communications. Okay, that's a lot of traffic inventory, guys. Very fast lines of high position lines of travel. Okay. Okay, so once you get in that measure and scale, it processes lines in earth line. Now the core line communication lines in the mapping sequence, more recognition of timelines than synchronization of location of its avatar, change the clocking centers of seconds, minutes, and hours in frame. Okay. So the seconds become the minutes, and the minutes become the hours, and the hours becomes all line. What's after hours and lines? Set lines of months, line position location of years and traction. Now what years are, guys, is light years. Years equals light years. Okay, years equals light years. Okay? Now, years is equals light years. That's Lyrian lines that communicates constellation path, right? So it sets line core center location to its system all through console, directing lines of ground line core centers to Ryan's belt, directing lines of line position locations all as are measure and scale. To balance out all communication line screen adaptation, you're bringing in light years and travel over lines of years over traction. So it systematically changed the clocking screen adaptations of flux, guys. You have to understand the body information location to its system. You got to merge into the traffic inventories to your body through inline core centers to the dream interpretations. Setting lines of grounds, set 20 lines of measure, 80 lines of sequence. This is off through phone line. In position into 20 seconds over frame, into 40 lines in calculation setting, into percentage in travel communications. All right, high signals. Ground lines of surface in processing 1 in position of 2, 3 inhibitors over screen lines at 4 panels. Now directing lines of grounds, high lines of service, set position location, measure and scale, right? Sets position of 50% line into X line 1 at D. Over cross lines in line position of E, over lines of E. Slash lines of E tractions, 50% over lines into question. I line centers, line connections, high lines equals lines of question over frame. Sets course centers lines of A track, set position lines of B, set position of C in center, operation lines of D, X lines into X box, platform as set traction. Okay? Measures and scales all through a pyramid and travel. Okay? Everything is inside input. So when you understand the astral projections and the astral connections to the astral line connections to your surface, you get to try to understand how to set up your primer circuits and your primates in positional location, measure, and scale. The process of communication lines is its platforms over screen adaptations of flux over screen adaptations of setting. Communication lines of grounds, 3 lines of settings, 6 lines of measure, 4 lines of scale, 4 lines of setting, 4 lines of sequence, and set position. Setting communicates high set location setting, add platforms over cross location setting, and hola! Setting platforms of 1, 2, 3, and 4 lines of scale on the grounds. Now the grounds core centers to the location grid, opens line signal location system all through travel, guys. This is where it comes into all travel and position. Inside track correlation to your Earth. See, your Earth is the inside line. This is your location grid. This synchronize your setting to your floor mats and location holographic gridding. Setting your pyramid activation line core centers. The above signal location is your sun. Sun line core centers in your moon and 3 tractions and 3 direct signals and ground lines of service in seconds, minutes, and hours. 4 position lines of meters and travel. So the high line signals has a line ground line. Process lines and signal lines of 1, 2, and 4 lines of setting the cerebral cortex and mystical cortex of design. Walking lines of service over line signal location system all through travel and direction. How to see its summation lines, core centers lines of high position lines of measure and scale, platforms over lines of E factors over screen, and adaptations of flux. Setting travels in point communication system all through calculation system, all through traction. Okay? Highlight signals of panels, operation, service, and travel. And information to its settings. Okay? Seed potting. All lines of communication lines of travels and point lines of communication to a system. Highline signals, highline centers, highlines of travel. Okay? But I'm just showing exactly how you come into location grids and set tractions. Okay? Okay, then we have a process of communication setting. All through set wormholes are now in signal of travel inside of grounds, right? Then we open up the signal line high set interference and open lines of course, lines of channel, and time lines of position and change the product acceleration setting in real time. The operation signal comes in all communication setting, high lines of surface and traction. Okay? Complicated stuff, but it's a lot of fun. But it's all inside the pyramid. Everything's inside the line. So the pyramid itself is a shape lines of anomaly. Now we understand the cross lines of referencing. We understand the hieroglyphics, the hieroglyphics, high core center location and travel. Everything is done from the inner circuit to the outer circuit to the audio line core center location to system that change the inhibitors of our screen adaptation to its flux, that change the mystical cortex lines of design, that change the matrix cortex correlation setting the configuration lines of light metaphors, that sets position, location, and measure and scale, that balances all communication setting, how you communicate your system through carbon, silicone, crystalline, anti-mantle, anti-carrying, or helter-skelter in structural location of sketch. Sketching lines of screen is a process lines of angles. Systematic lines screen line adaptation system all through travel. Look at that, it disappeared. You're not allowed to see it yet because the frequencies are too fast. But I'm showing you again, there it is in tractions. Done, right? So the offline comes in position, location, measure line, and scale. Okay? the operation signals, lines its communication lines of earth tone, sending course to location system all through tractions, all through platform above the skyline. Okay, that's inside your earth. Earth is inside the earth of its position of 12 DNA lines of earth. There's 12 planets in one earth line rotation. In a platform, sea lines of sky, sky lines of grids, and sky lines of setting. So once those platforms come in high signals, we change the ground lines of surface. Measure on scale, balance out communication lines of high calculations. Directing lines set course center location XT1000 and travel. XT1000 travel changes all communication lines of course of time and set position. 45 angles, setting lines of flux over tubing. Directing lines energize, catapult, catalysts, and line communications of compartments that changes the complacement system to its ecosystem of travel communications. High lines of channels, operation settings, inside rotation surface interactions. Okay? Inside traction. Outside provision. Inside rotation. Pyramid activation line spring, inside traction. So everything in the simulation, guys, is already done through equation. All right? There's nothing to do. All you have to understand in an online rotation system is just live the full life of just existing, evolving, and expanding, nothing else in travel. Right? Bring it back in equation, back in center, back in operation, high calculation, screen adaptation, flux. But the position lines of high center calculation, lines of box frame, has to understand how to go through its dimensional sail travel. Okay? That's a box frame going this way, and the 3 lines of measure and a 45 split lines of anomaly. That's percentage course centers, that's 5 lines of measure. That puts 50% line charge, plus line sets positive line communication system all through tractions. So that puts lines of position location line conditions of 51 points, setting position lines of high travels and point lines of graph. 50-50 is a 100 line screen. Sets position of 500 lines of measure. Scales communication lines of time sequence 1000 line measure. Scales communication high position of 50 cents. Now 50 cents is on the dollar. That dollar line signal location setting to all lines of travel. Sending course centers into its center course system lines of travel. Directing lines and link is division lines of plus lines of angle, subtraction, and adding and multiplication grounds into its mapping sequence of math. Math is the modification lines of its mind into the atmosphere lines of time to measure, into holographic screen, adaptations of flux over screen, high course centers, lines of travel, and direct signal locations of grounds. All through traction, all through divisions. All right, in set position. Okay, look at that, disappeared. Again, see, you're not allowed to see it because the frequencies are too high for you to identify. There's interaction, all right? Now, measure and scale. As you get in position, location, and light webbing, because you have to process communication system all through tractions, right? All right, line signaling is line rotation lines. So let's get 90% line and positions. Okay, start with the 59% over screen. Okay, sending lines of 50-50. Nothing's 50-50 because it outlines the signals to 51 into 40 line tractions. 50 line signal into 65 rotation. 75 line centers into 70 rotation. Or track location lines at 80% into 10 over lines. It's another 10 line position. That puts line course centers, line conditions of 20 line signals into 100% line screen, adaptations of flux over screen. Okay? How to scales the balance of communications in your metric meters and line conditions modification system all through travel. Okay, modificates the grounds in graph communication screen lines adaptation. Primary circuits lines of flux, set course lines of 3 travels and point lines of graphs. Crossing angles in a 4-line communication setting and all communication lines of service location your webbing. Webbing screens, directing lines of grounds and umbrella, ether cores, and deferments line position location and travel. Set course centers, line direct signals, XT1000 comes out in position, and travel course centers, location and setting. Out through lines, highways, and tractions, directing line signatures, line signal location setting and measure and scale. The offline communication system comes through all track locations. Directing lines of grounds, high lines of surface, and set position. Okay? Your highways and all setting. Indicate lines of inventory. We're going through fonts in position of bold. Setting lines of panels and structured timelines and set position lines of communications. Towers have communication lines, 2 lines of panels, 3 lines of tractions, 4 line divisions, 5 lines of signals, 6 lines of measure, and 8 lines of screen. Okay, crossing angles and point lines of settings. All through the process of communication system, all through wind graphs and travel communications. Very complicated stuff, guys. Very complicated. but it's all lines and signals inside rotation. Okay, your traffic, your inventories, your Skynet, your SkyGrids. Now, understanding the SkyGrid line centers, you put X-line boxes in position of 0 tractions. Tic-tac-toe. Overline sequence lines of 0, process lines of X over platform, platforms over lines, cassette lines of triangulation, triangulation flux in 3 lines of angles, and set lines of communications. Direct lines of grounds, high lines of service, location setting into location grid. Crossing line angles, process lines of 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5, and 6 lines of platforms over line. Setting travel point lines, sonar graphs, and communication lines of measure and scale communications. Directing lines of the pyramid travel. There's your pyramid inside, outside line condition. All right, so directing lines of lines, we bring in the red, the security lines of panels, and process over cross location lines of 4 lines of signal location and system of travel. Directing lines of grounds and pi center location system of travel. Calculate and modify lines of blue lines of plasma line connection setting, has a all core center location setting that processes communication setting high travels, ether core line communications and measure and scale communications. Now, directing line center locations, we go in cloak and dagger. Setting cross line angles and 3 lines of signals. Now we're going to open all signal location setting. High lines of channels and direct lines of grounds. High lines of signals. Line condition cross line of angles. Setting a mapping sequence in real-time measure. Scales of communication crossing angles and lines of position of flux. Cross line communication of multiple levels changes all communication lines of timelines and sequence in real time. The seconds and miles and meters and missions and location system all through travel. There's the map. Okay. Come in high signal location system all through calculations. Okay. To see inside, you see inline rotations, interactions. All right. All through supposition. Okay. Very powerful stuff when you understand what's going on with your traffic inventories. Inside traction. Inside the simulation systems, guys. The simulations of the platforms. Angle point lines of graph, towers of communication, right there. Boom. Right across locations, right? And then you have the XT1000 above line and rotations of service. Process calculation setting high directions. Getting communication lines of grounds into solar system lines of changing. Setting positions of 1 center and position lines of traction center locations, right? Directing lines of angles, process lines of communication setting and programming. Inline rotation inside track communication setting the flux over screen into Pluto. There's Pluto. Say hello. Setting core centers, lines of travel, direct lines of link, process lines of 1 over screen. Overshadowing core centers, lines of travel. Directing line links, high centers, lines of communications. Process indication system off the travel. Direct lines of 1 signal. And position lines of green lines of sequence. Over cross location to a system off the calculations. Okay. All calculated, modify, and traction. Okay. In set position. All right, guys. I know it's complicated stuff what I'm saying, but you have to truly understand how to set up a mapping sequence location setting. And you use your cloak and dagger of your line signals, change communication lines of grounds. Now you can set up line core centers into blue line screens. There's a lot of things you can do once you understand the information system all through calculations. Interactions, right? Sets lines of signals and location to its system. Okay, so I'm just showing you how powerful it is, how you come in that direct state location system all through travel. Processing the angles is knowing exactly how to set position lines of tone. The operate the signal location system all through settings. Communicates lines of grounds and high lines of surface and locations. Bringing that into high core centers in travel. Point lines of graph and waving screen adaptations of 3 lines of flux. Then we bring back inline screen adaptation. We change the correlation lines of time, change the blue line screens to 3 lines of signals in set position. Set core centers lines of 4 over measure lines of 5 in travel. Okay, coming into another pyramid in set position road graph screen. Directing ground lines, high lines of signals over red over pi, inline rotations, inside calculations, screen lines adaptations as track locations. Coming at high measure and scale, process lines of 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5, and 6 locations. Okay, highways and tractions. Color at the line screen. Now we get line core centers, line core center location system all through travels. Directing lines in purple. Purple here, and purple here. And rotations in traffic inventory. Directing lines of grounds, changing lines of wall sequence, location system off through calculations. Ground lines of high centers, so we change the ground lines of high set calculation system. Let's add line position lines of pink, and a pink crosses lines of angles. 3 lines of signals, process lines of 3 lines of angles. Setting communication lines of grounds, back and set, position, location, measure, and scale communications. Set up an open line sequence, high lines of power, generates the screen lines, offline communication, inside track communication to a system out through travel. Directing lines of grounds, pyramid 1, pyramid 2, and line screen adaptations of flux. Over screen adaptations, setting travels in point lines of graph, measure and scale, color the screen lines, pixelation graphs, communication height, center, location, and setting. Come into all, calculate, and modify. Okay, let's get in lines of communication, lines of grounds are green. Setting lines of travels in point communication, lines of surface. Color the coloration system. Timeline centers into box frame. Triangulation flux over screen adaptations. 3 angles and point lines of calculation setting and holographic line connections of film stripping and set design. Setting cross line angles and line communication setting highlights of surface. And then we change the communication lines of time measure and scale communication to its box frame. Correlates the system inside tractions inside the ceiling and rotation lines of traction. The operation line signals. Now we change the core centers lines of time measure and scale. 3 signals lines of grounds of sonar in line rotation surface and traction. Okay. Then we change the ground lines of surface location setting through location to its setting. Process angles, cross lines of 1, cross lines of 3, cross lines of 4, and set tractions. Now, directing lines of ground lines, on-line signals, and a 45 flux lines of angle, and line communications, high lines of surface. Setting sequence lines of panel, the operation system, all through tractions. Now, it comes in the high signal. Now, this is where it comes really interesting. Your position location is all signal location. This is the line communication of Earth inside traction. That's all inside your Earth. All inside your Earth. Countries on the on-line setting, outline rotations, 3 traction line direction location of mapping center. Setting sequence lines of panel and communication setting high lines of surface. Oh yeah. High lines of channels operate lines of ground lines of height correlation system of travel. Directing lines of ground lines operate the signal location system all through tractions. Right? So it's Earth within the Earth within the Earth of 12 angles. All right, so we set up the green lines, cross line signals, outline rotation. We bring the string line course centers. The high course center has a course set locations into all line communication system. The process of its earth line rotates the system lines of travel. Now it has direct lines of panel and remote lines of screen adaptations of flux. Okay? Center core lines and ground lines. The high core center locations, monitoring system locations earth. Process lines and line communication to its grounds and set position all travels. So that's communication high center location system, all remote. Directing lines of ground side communication lines of high lines of surface. Then we come into the blue waters, which is the core centers into water tank. Directing lines in console communication setting and measure and scale. Coming into the underwater line screens, adaptation to underwater cities. Process lines of water lines, body lines of 7 lines of track center location system off their tractions. Directing lines of earth tones in line communication measure and scale. There's your earth. Well, measure on scale on 4 lines of angles and eye receptor lines of screen. Okay? Oh yeah. When you bring it in, you can see the highways and travel. See? You turn the earth into a box frame. See? You can turn your earth into anything and picture frame line. Sense of what's going on with your system and travel, communication to its setting. Right? You turn your earth into a box frame, triangulation frame. There's your traffic, there's your inventory. Inside tractions. Right? Each one has a point marker, has a line set location of probing that calculates and modifies lines of security lines of panels. Setting position here, setting set positions here, and setting track communications there. 3 lines of grounds, right? And you change the direct signal location system all to travel. But you know where they are in security lines of measure in real-time remote. Looking above, looking below, looking to the side, looking this way, looking that way. It doesn't matter. What matters is you keeping track and monitoring the system and you're probing location of your orbs or where they're going through tractions, all through the calculations, right? Then you get in line center location setting. Then you set up all business locations. Set up black markers. Okay, unison, you set position of black markers where you are in your satellites. Satellites, core center location, lines of signals, 3 lines of measure and scale. Okay, 3 angles, point lines of graph, security lines of measure, in line position location of 2 line position of Pluto. Setting ground lines of surface, change communication lines, direct signals, lines of ground lines of surface location of your system off your Earth. Process calculation lines, high direction location system. Now, the center point lines changes core center lines of time measure. Locking centers, line communication settings, sets long communication lines. So we go with the purple line rotation and center calculation lines of 3 center location setting to travel. X marks the spot in platform communication. Okay? Working with that signal, you set up the pyramid. Changing line screens, adaptations over lines, setting lines of position of 3 lines of measure in molecular design line. Triangulation line spot, sets course centers, location sitting where you are in traction. Directing lines of grounds, operate the line height center location of your system, change communication lines, setting mapping sequence lines of panel, process line in line rotations, outline scale, and sonar echo chambers and screen. It's calculating modify, directing in the opposite direct signal location system all through travel. Direct and redirect and set position. Waving screens, adaptation, echo sonar, line position all levels, 45 communications setting high travel. Okay? So you're constantly changing time measure at scale of your Earth and rotation lines of surface. All through setting, right? Crossing angles, 3 lines of flux, 3 lines of panels, process lines of quasar, calculating modified through pyramid track locations, waving screens to another line into a highway screen. 3 lines of settings, 3 lines of divots over transits over setting, and rotation lines of pi. Setting lines of travels, endpoint lines of graph. Changing lines of measure. Now we're bringing in lines of orange lines of signals, point lines of graph into measure and scale. X marks the spot and 4 line division location setting and travel. Bring it in through equation. There's the X line rotation surface. Okay, travel endpoint line graph inside the simulation system all through travel. Okay? There's the intelligence, there's the eye. See the eye? There's the intelligence right there behind the screen. Around the system lines of travel. Okay, so direct lines of eye line is an eye line center to an eye line rotation surface to its Earth and rotation surface and traction inside track communications and direct signals. Okay, you know exactly how to set up your mapping sequence lines of box frame. All through probing, all through orbiting, all correlates and setting to travel. So you calculate and modify, you're constantly changing line screens. Setting lines of green over cross locations, inside travels, outside rotation surface and travel. Inset tractions, all through calculations. Okay, so I'm just showing you measure and scale, how to do that in modification. All through setting, all through set position, all through traction. Okay? Because it's all in your mind and imagination. That's what your Earth is. But you can turn your Earth into a box frame, triangulation frame. You can turn it into a circle frame. You can turn it into a star frame. That's why it's so powerful. I'm just showing you a box frame through the Earth itself. The Earth forms and mutates its own setting, location, or its mode. The body has to come in its own transformation system of transits and divots. And understanding that through the transition changes all of the morphing in time, measure, and scale. The remote centers change communication of its monitoring system that changes the seconds, minutes, and hours in frame. Setting course centers to Earth change the communication lines of time, measure, and scale. Changing all direct lines of your highways, setting lines of sequence, location system, all through tractions, all through setting, all through operation. Okay? So you're constantly changing the time centers of zone locations to your Earth in set position. All right, so X3000 comes in platform. Let's bring in black line. 3 lines of signals and location system, right? The black ones are the X3000s, right? Okay, time measure and scale, offline, rotation center, line rotation system, and tractions all through crop circle. Okay, crop circle 1, and line position all levels, setting core lines of travels, and 3 lines of measure and scale, process communications. Directing lines of angle points and line position location and mapping sequence. Change course lines of time again, and line course centers into set position of swirls. Setting lines of communication on high travels, endpoint lines of graph, in measure and scale, communication lines of oscillation line communication on the path, change the collagen line release and setting to your pathogens that change the neurological system and travel in your highways and travel communication lines of earth tones, setting lines of communication lines and mapping sequence lines of pi. Hooah. So you're constantly on the same earth line rotation, you're just changing the correlations of time measure. That's all you're doing through chart correlation of your earth. Earth lines of 1, earth lines of 2. Now you can use 12 lines of earth into one cycle. But you have to understand the mapping sequence as a pi that overrides the signal location to its highway and set position of its inventory and travel communications. Very powerful stuff, guys, and mapping sequence lines communicate inside and outside location all at once, right? All right, so that's line signals. That's process communication lines of wind patterns. Overlying signals are red. Now, red comes in line communication setting of solar screen adaptations of flux. Setting lines of seconds, minutes, and hours that change routes and routers and location to its highways and traction. Sending direct signals, lines of grounds, and the operation signal location setting sets communication system high lines of travel. High lines of signals. Let's bring in the traffic inventory. Let's change the structure of design line. Outline rotations and travels, endpoint lines of graph, outline signal location of 4 lines of measure, bring in that communication system all through setting of structure of its design. 3 lines of signals, process lines of 1 window frame, and position of structure frame and travel communication setting, all through setting. There's the structure, there's the building. So that's what you're constantly doing with your Earth. You're constantly changing time. You're collapsing each time through structure design through geometric lines of its Earth. You're forming through your highways your networks of design location setting, which is all interpreted how you see yourself, and all communications existing all at once, all through structure, all through design. All right, changing timelines of centers and locations, setting a box frame and travel. See, look, inside the Earth line, see, that's what you're doing. So changing window frames, track frames, communication frames, direct lanes, high locations, setting track communications. Road graphs, setting offline signals, inside rotation, center location setting of sonar. Directing lines of wind paths, high course centers, XT1000 comes in platform and communication highlights of the screen. But it's all inside and outside, inside of you, all through its Earth. All right, travel point lines of graph, inline rotations, platforms over lines, E factors over screen. Okay? Setting high position lines of travels and direct lines of link over screen adaptations. Process lines of up, angle points of down. Now we change the communication lines of time measure. We change the structure of the building and rotation lines of surface. We outline the scale, crossing angles, and the 4 lines of flux of anomaly. Changing communication lines, X lines of 1, platforms at direct lines of X lines of platforms over 2. Okay? So there's so much you can do just with the Earth itself. It's in that line real time, existing, evolving, and expanding all at once, guys, so it's constantly changing its measure and scale. Process and that communication setting that travels. So, setting that communication lines, high direct location system, it's very powerful when you come into high core lines of colors, lines of patterns. Now, in that position, you've got to go cloak and dagger because that protects on the mapping sequence in 3 lines of measure and 4 lines of scale, 6 lines of communication, and 7 lines of traction. Okay, so you're changing the online calculation setting, you're changing the map. That's all you're constantly doing. Cross lines of angles of 45 lines of sonar, echo chambers, lines of Fox line, and direct location of grounds. The operation signals comes inside rotation to surface locations. Very complicated stuff, but it's all levels of simulation. Grounds, lines, high center locations, all through your imagination setting. 2 window frames. See the window frames of travel? There they are. Boom. High signal locations of door frames in travel. Boom. Right? High signal locations lines, like communication lines of high signal correlations. So when you set up the simulation, it's already done through equations, guys. There's nothing to do in subtractions. So you're just creating lines of anomaly in a long position that's already set in travel. Right? But to see the mapping sequence, know how to actually change the information system all through travel, it's amazing in set location and simulations. How it calculates and modifies how you see lights and lines of communication in the setting. Inside out and outline inline rotation to its towers of communications. Right there. Look at the lights. It's all set up in shades and lights and lines and screen adaptation and all the settings, right? It's already done through its equations, guys. And there's your galaxy. Okay, now let's bring in the planets. I know you guys are mind blown. But this is about understanding how to really come in your position, location, your systems, right? Let's get interactions and setting the 3-line signals, location system all through travel. Okay? Measures and scales, rotation lines of surface and track locations, direct lines and links. Hey, they're communicating with you. Let's bring green lines, inside position the I-line rotations, change communication lines of time sequence. Whoa. Let's add red line cycles and secure lines of measure inside. Whoa. All right, so now we're setting volume here. Now we're coming into the mass. Let's go into whites, cloak and dagger. They're going cloak and dagger now. Okay, set track locations. Whoa, right? Let's get into blue. Blue lines, outline rotations. Setting lines of 3 sequence lines of panel. Process calculates line, high direct signal location setting, highlights of surface attraction, right? Directing moderation lines, core lines of set location, your simulation over line signal location system all through travel. Walking centers, high symbolism lines of traction centers. Walking line communication highlights of measure of 45 angle. Setting high core centers location system all through travel. Okay, ground lines, powers, atmosphere. Okay, so as you look at the simulation, it's amazing what you can do with your Earth. You can line signals, line ground lines, high core centers, lines of travel. Setting and mapping lines of panel, process its calculation setting to its highway, resurface location system author calculations. Right? Create its anomaly inside rotations and travel. Oh yeah. Right? But you can see all line communication of shapes inside the attractions. That's already set up in its provision. Your dimensional worlds is already set up, guys, in line signals. Know exactly how to go through line communications, all through attractions, all through settings. Inside its position, location, and setting. All through attraction. Okay? You look really close, you can see the highway. Inside setting, right? Red over line, shading line, high core center location of travel, direct center location of lights. Offline, inside rotations, tracking communication setting lines of centers, or in surface locations set in a high position. Look at the simulation that you guys live in. Whoa, changing platforms. Online centers, online rotation, in-track communications. Whoa. 3 different colors lines, green over line, black over green, green over blue, blue over yellow, yellow over pink, black over line, ground lines, setting mapping sequence lines of pi. Setting new mapping sequence, right? In seconds over screen. Keeping moderating line screen adaptations of flux over setting in travel communications. All through setting. So to change the map, you got to change the cloak and dagger. Change core centers lines of time, blue line signals. I'm bringing lines of centers, lines of echo, lines of centers of travel. Okay, crossing over lines of white, coming into blue. And now we're offline, inline rotation to sight lines into atmosphere line change. Change the direct lines, we're going to gold. Now we're going to go lines of 1, 2, and 3, and 4 lines of platforms over line. Okay, process indicates the system all through travel calculations. Okay. High grounds line centers to go in back into black. Black lines, of course, centers of changing space lines of center and lines of measure. 3 scales, 4 communication lines of 5 lines of communications. So what you're doing is you're constantly changing the formation lines in the same photo in set tractions. Very powerful stuff, all through mapping through your Earth through a box frame, guys, inside position. Very, very powerful stuff, isn't it? See? See all the faces inside? This is the Colosseum. That's the Colosseum. Okay? But you see the intelligence, right? See their eyes, online center location to assist them all through travel, right? So it's all set up, your simulations, all through tractions, all through mapping, all through position, location, to setting. Okay? So once you understand how to use a cloak and dagger, then you can do anything in line communications. Changing structure, changing design. Adding new highways and black markers, green markers, red markers, yellow markers, anything in travel, right? So you constantly change it. It's no longer the Colosseum, it's now a highway, right? This is 4 lines of scale, then you're going to change it again. You're going to change the metric core centers. Bolding communicates in high lines of surface and travel. Direct lines of 45 flush lines, screen adaptation of webbing, and screen adaptation. Crossing angles, line screen adaptations at all levels. Echo Zonar line communications, Echo Zulu. Cross inside travel communication simulation. Whoa. Ground lines of service, location system, all through travel. Whoa. Right? High line signal locations inside travel. Whoa. Right? So you see how your simulation is already set up. It's already done. Now you're just recognizing the body, where to go in this mapping sequence, lines of space, lines of time. Right? Walking sequence here is the platforms over line, screen adaptations, flux over screen, right? So changing the measure of scales, guys, is changing the measures of set position and location in your system. Know exactly how to calculate and modify that and how to change its mapping sequence of time and set tractions, right? So you're constantly just changing all levels of 4 different angles. Different vision, different cortex, adding frames, adding no frames, adding all frames all at once, right? But that's all it is. It's set tractions, okay? So there you go. Back in sequence, back in panel, back in operation. Whoa! Okay? Powerful stuff, isn't it, guys? Framing all sequence, all time, measure, all scale. Existing and evolving all at once. And that's what it means when everything is happening all at once. So you're constantly changing frames of creating. You guys are in your news cycles, but you have to get out of all creation of your memory. That's not you. It's all memory of who you always have access to. Its imaginations. Okay? All right. So we'll stop there in tractions. It's at traction locations. All right? See you in 5.